Communication. I swear, we are just in the infancy of this podcast, but I feel like there will be so many episodes dedicated to how we communicate, how everybody communicates in the workplace. Well, today's about speaking well, and you may be surprised that in order to speak well, there's a lot more that goes into it than the words and the noises that come out of your mouth. It's Relationships at Work, your employee experience and workplace culture podcast. I'm Russel. Thank you so much once again for joining us. If you've been listening to the podcast, or if this is your first time listening to the podcast, I hope you enjoy yourself. If you do, if you find some value, please share with others. Spread the wealth. Let others know that this is a worthwhile way to spend your time. Also, in order for me to make sure it's a good use of your time, I love hearing from you. Whether it's on the Instagram account, Relationships at Work, whether it's in our Facebook group, Relationships at Work, or if you want to email me directly, yep, there's an email account. It's not fancy. I haven't gotten its own server or anything like that, so it's still a Gmail account for now. It is yourrelationships@work@gmail.com. I know it's a little tricky with the @ and the @ but one of them's a symbol and one of them's the word. You're smarter than me. You'll figure it out. Needless to say, I want to make this podcast as useful and as helpful and as supportive of your needs as possible. And the best way to do that? Well, that comes from your great ideas and your great suggestions. So please feel free to reach out, and I'd love to hear from you. Speaking of hearing about things, great segue, right? Great. Okay, needless to say, the guest we have today, Vicki McLeod, she's amazing. She's got a couple of books under her belt. She's an amazing entrepreneur that's won a couple of awards around that. I'll get into how amazing Vicki is later, but right now I just want to tell you that she is phenomenal. She's a great resource. I have had the absolute pleasure to share the same island as Vicki. So every once in a while, I feel like I need to reach out to a big brain. Well, Vicki McLeod has always been an amazing, accessible resource, and I am so honored that she's taken some time to hang out with us and share her thoughts on speaking well. She wrote a book about it, so if you're super curious to learn more, definitely I'll have the link in the show notes on relationshipsatwork.ca. So if you want to dig in more and contact Vicki, you can do that as well. I'll have all the information there. You know, enough about me. Let me introduce you to Vicki. Hold on. That person over there, that's Vicki McLeod. And here's why she's awesome. Almost 3 decades of running Main Street Communications, offering expertise in organizational planning and leadership development. She's author of 4 books, one of which, Effective Communication at Work, Speaking and Writing Well in the Modern Workplace, is actually a big focus of what we're going to talk about today, but I'm not done talking about Vicki yet. She's a founding member of the Grey Swan Guild, a collective helping leaders influence positive change, and she's won a bunch of awards for entrepreneurship and small business. She knows of what she speaks. Hello, Vicki.
Hello, Russell. I sound so amazing.
Coffee makes me be the hype man I've always wanted to be. I'll just say that right now.
Great. It's great. Yeah. I love it. Yeah. Well, it's good because, we don't do that for ourselves. It's great to have someone else do it for us. It's lovely. Actually.
Absolutely. I like to shoot out of the cannon with a big rah, 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 because everybody's like, oh, we got to hype it up a bit. Okay, good. That's where we're going from. We got to leave from there. Or people just look at me like a deer in the headlights going, you need to slow the fuck down. Anyway, moving on. First out of the gate is the question I want to ask. And I ask everyone this because I really find it sets the scene of, well, just how much employee experience influences us decades later, not much like 3 years later. So first, Vicki, I want to know, what's the best or worst, one or the other, employee experience you've ever had?
I think I would have to say, and this might seem like a strange answer. When I first started out working and was going to school and so on, I worked in a chain restaurant. And I have to say that that experience was actually turned out to be, when I can look back now, many decades later, a really excellent employee experience, because that manager in particular treated us like a true team. And I came to subsequently find out later that this wasn't true in this chain restaurant across all of the franchises. But in our particular one, which happened to be in Langley, BC, here in the Fraser Valley in BC and Canada, so very small town, a small dairy farming community. But this particular manager was really able to treat all of us in our various roles, whether we were the person washing the dishes in the kitchen, or in my case, I worked the front end. There were 5 stations and 4 staff. So it was a really busy, demanding environment. We had to be really organized. We had to have good systems, but he really treated us as part of the team, in the sense that he solicited our opinions. He asked us what changes would help. He treated us super well if we had, been really, as we call in the industry, slammed. He always bought pizza at the end of the night, to kind of say thank you to us at 3 a.m., after we hustled all the drunks out the door, kind of thing. So it was a really, for me, I didn't know it at the time, because I was, in a sense, working that crappy restaurant job, that starter job. But I came to see that his skill as understanding who we were as people, and that we had needs as people, that we weren't just filling functions. We were actually human beings trying to do a difficult job under not great circumstances, and frankly, for not a lot of money. So I've often looked back on that and thought, that kind of, in a sense, he was leading in that role, embracing a lot of really sort of learned leadership principles without ever actually having had the training. It sort of came to him naturally. And as I say, I came to find out that particular organization didn't have a really strong leadership team training. It just happened to be him. But it taught me a lot. And in subsequent years, I have learned to use that in the work I do with leaders, to think back on that time and how it affected me as an employee. And again, in a not very important role.
And I love hearing that as a service industry baby myself, years and years of that. It's funny how those restaurants generally, and I'm talking generally here, treat staff as disposable. Oh, if you're a problem, don't worry, you can be replaced.
Mm-hmm.
I heard that. I genuinely heard that. And I'm 15, 16, 17. And that stuck with you. I'm quite a few decades older than that now. And I still remember that. So to hear a beacon of light where I'm assuming your boss was quite young as well, because
when I think about it now, he didn't seem like it at the time, because I was so young, of course. Then, but now when I think about it, he was just a young guy with family. And interestingly, his wife worked there too. And that could be a situation fraught with, as all kinds of difficulties when you have interpersonal relationships in the workplace as well. Especially, there could be nepotism, there could be favoritism. But he really handled just all of that with a lot of real tact and diplomacy. And I would say very mindfully, very aware of the impact. And I often say to me, there's nothing kind of worse than unconscious abusive leadership. It's one thing if you kind of know what you're doing and you're trying to do it better, but if you absolutely don't have any idea that you're having an impact, it's really difficult to work with. So it was very good in lots of ways.
I wonder where he is now. Like those things of like,
I hope he owns the company. I don't know, but I hope he does.
Fair. So our topic today is about speaking well at work. I've already had the pleasure of speaking with Leslie O'Flahaven earlier. I think it was my first podcast, where it was about plain language. So we talked more about simplifying language, not about, I don't know if presentation is the right word, but I'm excited to talk about that today, because I think communication is so important and there's so many different sides to it. I have a feeling I'm going to do many, many episodes on communication alone. But speaking well, maybe we should first define what is speaking well.
Would you like me to take that on?
I would love that.
Okay. Yeah. So, I think it is really, in its simplest terms, and this is again in that broad area of communication, it really is about getting your message across. So speaking well is another way, verbal language is another way that we communicate with one another, and that we are in some sense trying to get a message across, and we're also trying to understand what other people are communicating to us. And so because you've read the book, as the book progresses, I talk not only about the speaking side but also about the listening side, which has to do with things like active listening, asking questions, as I just did with you. Okay, do you want me to take that on? Not really necessary to clarify, obviously, I'm a guest on your podcast, but good to ask clarifying questions as you go. So I really think it is about how do we verbally then communicate a point of view? How do we persuade if that's the role that we're in? How do we present ideas on and topics? And how do we often also handle difficult conversations? How do we problem solve using verbal communication as opposed to other kinds of tools that we might use? And in today's workplace, we have a lot of choices. You can just text someone, or you can email, but you can hop on a Zoom or a Slack chat. But face-to-face verbal communication is a skill that is necessary and needed, and in certain circumstances is really the one that you want to employ first.
So why is this so important? I mean, we have a lot of people probably that need to learn how to speak better. I'm going to be with speaking well, I'm being so aware of my grammar and how I say this. So in the intent of speaking well or trying to learn how to speak well, why should that be a goal? Why is it so important?
I think, well, that's in some ways the answer to that question would be personal, right? If you're in a workplace and you're wanting to progress in terms of your career, and a lot of my books are written toward people who are trying to improve certain skill areas. In fact, to be completely transparent, this one, the one that we're talking about today, was really based on an algorithm. The publishing company tracked searches and the number of searches on the topic of effective communication at work and what the subtopics were. So the book was really designed to address real questions that people were asking online continually, and largely an audience of people who are in sort of early to mid-career, sort of, and mostly in professional settings, who were looking for advice on how can I use communication better in order to advance in my career. And, ultimately, not to be just spoiler alert for the book, but it ultimately becomes kind of about a form of personal leadership, and that can ultimately be translated into organizational leadership. So if you are looking to progress and advance and be a sort of lead from where you are, improving your communication skills is going to be one of the key ways you're going to do it. And there's a lot of evidence and research that suggests that this is what employers are looking for. The importance, even when I talk about my service industry job, the importance of that leader to be able to communicate to us as a team, especially when the pressure was on, became critical to the success of that business. So again, personally, if you're interested in that, then this will be important to you. If you're engaging and interacting with other humans on a regular basis in your workplace or even in your daily life, also important.
Relationships are kind of key. Name of the podcast. So I think speaking well.
I know, I keeping that in mind.
So you mentioned this before. There are so many opportunities to speak in so many different ways. There's at meetings, at presentations, one-on-one, workplace conversations, just casual walk by a cubicle types. Are the skills the same to speak well? Like, is it pretty much no matter, are they interchangeable as to the tactics to be better at this?
Yeah, I think there's a couple that I would say are sort of foundational and that you can apply across. So one, of course, is clarity and simplicity. And I think if you're talking about your previous podcast, so there is a way that we want to take whatever it is that we're trying to say and boil it down if possible. And some situations you're able to prepare. And where you have that opportunity, I always say take the opportunity. In fact, I think I talk about something in the book, the 5 Ps of public speaking, for example. So if you're presenting or you're getting on the stage, and preparation is key. And so if you know that you're going in to give a presentation, or you're going in to have a difficult conversation with your boss or with a coworker, sometimes that's with an HR person, take the opportunity to prepare. And so we have a little formula that we use in our work. We've used it for years and years, and it's based comes out of the risk management models. You're probably familiar with it, Russ. But we sort of say 27-9-3. So 27 words should be able to be said in 9 seconds, and 3 themes or 3 key main messages. And that doesn't mean you're going to do that like you're going to be counting your words as you speak. But if you sit down and write that out, when you do sit down to speak, you're probably going to say, 50 words or 150 words, but you're going to make sure that the key message that you want to get across is contained in those words somewhere. So where you have that opportunity to do so, I think is really important, especially in the workplace, because we often do. We know we're having a meeting at 2, so we can actually start thinking about that meeting at noon or 10 or the day before or a week before, depending on the stakes, and I talk about that in the book as well. The stakes of the conversation change the nature of the conversation. So I think people want to be alert to what are the stakes here. Asking someone for coffee is a different kind of stake than asking someone for a raise.
I want to touch on the simplification thing, because we don't always get to prepare for a casual conversation, or some of those one-on-one meetings. Hey, can you just hop into my office really quickly? Preparation, though I'm a big fan of it because I do a lot of presentations, I will say simplification is that, it's that secret weapon that people probably don't realize can be more effective when speaking well, because a lot of people don't remember most of the things you say if you give them 17 things to remember.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you hammer home one and no more than three, I think there is science behind the fact that you will retain.
We call it the rule of threes in writing, and it comes out of the rhetoric work of Aristotle, actually, back in the days of the Greeks, and the art of persuasion, this sort of rule of threes. The human brain somehow is shaped for that. It's interesting. Our brains just are wired to three things seems to be what we can hold really easily. Yeah, so I think there's lots of ways in that sort of spontaneous conversation. So one of the things is what I did earlier, which is to ask questions. There's a couple of little tools that I use quite regularly. One is, if you could give me one word for this, what would it be? So you can do that with yourself. Again, if I was going to put this in one word, what would it be? Simplify.
You're also forcing other people you're conversing with to simplify and speak better.
Yes, which is really helpful because especially again, if you're into a more potentially heated situation, or a situation where, again, the stakes are higher or the matter is complex. And I think there's a danger that we have in our culture because we've become sort of, in a sense, a fast food culture, partly as a result of the digital environment that we're in, that we're trying to oversimplify complex things. And very often complex subjects require time and attention and concentration and focus. And we know that that kind of currency is often in short supply, especially if our workplaces are busy and they're demanding. So being able to understand that you're in a complex conversation, but there are ways that you can simplify it. So that's one of the ways is, asking questions using the one word. I often will work with people and I'll say, I can see that you're feeling strongly about this. On a scale of 1 to 10, how big of a hill is this for you to die on? And then they might say a 5, and then I think, okay, we can dial back. If they say this is a 10.5, this is a 20, then okay, this is giving me information that I can then continue the conversation in a more skillful way. Because now I understand a little bit more about it, or I can use that myself. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm feeling like 10.5 about how great it is to be with you this morning.
So one of the key ingredients to speaking well is, I'm assuming, understanding your audience better. And you're getting into that a lot with the questions. So how important, and you're illustrating it, curiosity. Curiosity will allow you to get enough information to craft your own message. Is that what you're saying?
For sure. I think, and I love that you're saying that. I was just rereading something I wrote. I wrote this actually a long time ago. I used to publish this little tiny magazine. And one of the things I wrote about was the wisdom of disturbance. So the value in feeling agitated and what we can learn from it if we can kind of step back from it a little bit and try to access, what's the usefulness of this? If only 2% of being this aggravated was useful to me, what might it be? And this little thing I wrote, which is kind of corny sounding, but it was, don't get furious, get curious. So it was really taking this principle that you're saying, curiosity, I think, is just such in a way, undervalued, because if we really can, look at the situation, think, well, okay, this is interesting. Not this is threatening, not this is upsetting, but this is interesting. It's interesting that I didn't expect that this would go this way, or it's interesting that I'm finding myself really desiring something different at work. And then get curious about that. And then in the conversations that you have with other people, be curious. I just think it's such a valuable perspective. It's we get to choose the state that we enter into a conversation with. And if we enter in with curiosity, or often I used to say to people, don't go in there trying to convince your boss. Go in there trying to collaborate with your boss. Change your mode of approach from convincing to collaboration, and it will change the dynamic of the conversation. And then you could add to that, wheel of choices, of perspectives, say, curiosity. What if I go in there curious instead of furious? For example, a lot of what I get asked to do in organizations or with clients is they're dealing with situations of conflict or things that they're finding really, truly difficult. That's why they've enlisted outside help, and our often day-to-day interactions aren't that difficult, but they're also an opportunity for us to move forward in our work, or even just to grow as people, to become better and more effective humans.
We're talking about conversing physically, like being in the same room is what we're generally talking about when we speak well. But this is still really important when it comes to text messages and emails. emails could be a whole show unto itself, and text messages. But a lot of this skill set, so curiosity, being clear, being simplified, you can bring that to any form of platform. It's just you remove a lot of the body language and a lot of the presence with that. So the principles are still relatively the same, or am I wrong on that?
No, I agree. I think the principles, what's different is the form and the expectations of the form, right? And this is interesting because when I was doing a lot of research for this book and kind of trying to pull together, this sort of, in a sense, my work lifetime of working in communications and organizations, it was just pre-COVID. So the book actually was published in April of 2020. So we went into COVID in March. And so we went from, some people using some digital interface tools like Zoom, et cetera, and Slack, in some ways, to absolute, like almost full adoption, almost overnight. And so it would have changed the book, I think, in some ways. I did manage to get a few lines in there because just before it went to print, we had the time. But it really wasn't sort of the thoroughly researched that side of it the way I would have liked to have done it. Anyway, having said that, it's just to say that I think that people became very quickly adapted to using digital tools, and actually quite effectively. I was mainly quite impressed by how people adapted to that. But the form is different. And so one of the points that I make in the book, and it still holds true, is that, texting is great for short, quick conversations. So you're at a conference with a bunch of colleagues and you need to decide what time you're meeting or where, or what time you're going to do your rehearsal for your presentation. Using text back and forth for that is really useful. It's not so useful if you need a record of the conversation. If you need to go back and you need to check. So email is really useful because it has all those, robust search functions, and we have a corporate record, and that's often very important, especially again, if the issues are more complex. So I tend to say, the more complex the issue, the more we need to pay attention to the form. Is this the right form for this issue? And this is why I say when you're getting into difficult conversations, face-to-face is often the best choice, because it's far more difficult to really understand and investigate a situation using the forms of, what am I trying to say? Asynchronous communication. I was going to say analog, the opposite. The asynchronous communication is really difficult. We need to kind of be in the room together. Same thing for developing really great ideas. You need to be in that space of brainstorming, of being able to go back and forth. And so the form that you choose really depends on the complexity of what you're dealing with and what is necessary with the communication later. So to reach mutual understanding, I think it's really important that we're in a room together, especially if the stakes are high. But if we're trying to organize information and organize schedules, we can use, tools that don't require this sort of the same level of engagement.
In your book, you talk a bit about an organization's communication culture. How does that influence someone's ability to speak well at work?
I think honestly, I think it really influences almost everything. And, it was funny when the question about the best and worst experience, because as a consultant, I've had the opportunity to observe a lot of cultures. I go in from the outside, and very often we're called in to solve a specific kind of communication problem. And really what we're looking at is a culture issue when we get in. And to a large degree, this is what sort of pushed me in a sense, or pulled me, maybe is a better term, into working with leaders, was because what I often saw in cultures was sort of like what I would call the absent or the abdicating leader. They'd sort of set these wheels in motion in their organization to behave in a certain way, and then had no real idea of how to deal with it. And so would just step away, would just like sort of abdicate their role. And it's really difficult in those cultures. I think it doesn't take people very long to learn the ropes. I mean, humans are designed to interact socially and to understand the nature of where we're safe and where we're not safe. And we get that very quickly. We use all of our senses in every moment to determine this. I mean, it's part of just how we're wired. So in an organization, it doesn't take long for an employee to understand what's okay and what's not okay. And if you are desiring to be an open communicator and you're in a culture that does not promote and support open communication, does not model it, it's going to be very hard. And I think earlier we were talking and you said, people, the metric that people often miss is that their people are quitting, or they're getting sick a lot, or there's a lot of passive aggressiveness in the workplace. And those are often signs that people aren't able to express and they're not being supported by their leadership appropriately. So culture really, to me, has everything to do with the ability. And that's both, whether that's online or offline communication. Because it dictates how people behave online. It dictates how people behave and interface with technology, whether they do or they don't.
A reactive culture can certainly hurt speaking well, i.e., there's no agenda for this meeting. We need to talk right now. You need to present in 5 minutes. Like there's no opportunity to prepare. There's no opportunity to be mindful, thoughtful, strategic. So I can see that hurry up and do things can certainly, from a culture, hurt your ability to speak well because you can't be intentional with it.
Yeah, totally. And I think that is so important, because this is where we, again, as I said earlier, we have a tendency now in our culture to we're hurrying to the finish line, and because I think, and again, I kind of put this at the feet of the digital environment. There's always something to do. And even if you're an individual sitting in a workplace and maybe you have responsibility for certain kind of digital tools or digital communication there, but then you probably also have your own Twitter account, and you probably also have your own, grandchildren on Facebook, or you have, different, there's always something to do. There's always something to check. And so we've become quite hurried in not only the actual demands. There are actual demands. When I worked in that restaurant, we had to get that lasagna onto the tables. There was no question about that. We had to meet those demands, but there weren't this whole other set of demands waiting at the end of that work day. And now there are. So issues can be complicated, and we tend to want to take a sort of an easy way out or a simple way out of them. But again, and I know your relationships at work is the title of your podcast, and I think your deep passion is for people who work in these cultures, people who are the employees. But I often bring things back to the leadership. I think the leadership in organization sets the tone for how communication occurs or doesn't occur.
Spot on. Well, the relationships at work is about leadership, workplace culture, employee experience, because they're all interrelated. The whole point of the podcast is really there's enough conversations about the customer, because a lot of organizations go customer equal money. So that's always the focus for a lot of people, and employees get sort of the short shift in that, even though they're the ones building the relationships with those customers. So yeah, I think very much the podcast is and has been very much about leadership, very much about the employee experience. I don't think I can talk about one without the other.
Yeah, it sort of goes there. That's what I found in writing the book, was that I sort of started out with sort of the thing about communication tools, but as the book progressed, it was sort of like, actually, this book is really about leadership. Actually, this is really about how can you, and again, I always take the perspective, and have for many years in my work, that you can lead from where you are. And absolutely, the leadership sets the tone for the culture, and either embraces or endorses or supports a certain kind of culture. But also each person sitting where they're sitting can have an impact and an influence. And it's about how you choose you're going to interface, or how you choose you're going to, which also, and I would never want to see anybody leave themselves in a position where it's unhealthy or toxic in any way. But you can certainly ask yourself the question, what can I do to contribute here? How can I make this better? And that's where those kinds of skills and being able to speak well or write well or choose the right tool for the right task in terms of communication can really make a difference.
I want to define the difference between speaking well and speaking poorly. I want to sort of like, if somebody had no idea and just came into an organization and you were to show a model of good behavior and bad behavior, what would those characteristics be? We'll start with the good one.
In terms of, I think, speaking, so first of all, some really basic physical things, being present, actually showing up. And, presence is both how we are physically. So do you show up? Do you make eye contact? Do you sit comfortably? Are you, close enough and far enough away? And these days that's a little bit different with social distancing, but, ensuring that you have a respectful physical presence, right? So that you're, not there. I used to work with a manager who used to come like way into my space. And it didn't work. And I finally had to I just spoke with him about it. And I said, please, can you just take a step back when you're speaking to me? I find it threatening. And, you're a large guy. And he was really taken aback and really appreciated it, because it kind of changed how he entered other conversations, particularly with other women. So just being aware of where you're at physically. It's a really good thing to do. And are you making eye contact? And put down the phone if you're entering into a verbal conversation with someone, please. I might sound really old fashioned when I say that, but it is, so important not to be distracted. And that's part of being present. So I think that and presence is also energetic. So it's not just, I'm here, I'm showing up, here I am. If you could see me now on the podcast, you'd see I'm shrugging and kind of like, okay, so what? But so being present is actually, I'm here energetically as well. I think that's a very, very first thing that's important, and then to make sure that you're using appropriate body language. So smiling, nodding, all of those kinds of things make a big difference when you're especially entering into a conversation. And wherever you can, set up the conversation to be in an appropriate location as well. You don't want to have a really important conversation in a super noisy environment. You don't want to have an important conversation in an environment where the person's not safe. Either person is not safe. So those are some of just the physical cues I would want people to pay attention to. Sorry, and then the rest of the question was what? So,
well, the opposite of that, I guess.
which I kind of got into a little bit, which is the kind of being distracted, looking at your phone, kind of slouching into your posture, not being present with the person, not being mindful. Yeah, basic things too. I always think about this, especially when I'm working with people who are going into doing speaking, is making sure that you're hydrated, making sure that you've had something to eat, like all of the kinds of things that you would do if you were preparing for anything else. Make sure that you do that as well. You're not going to do that for a casual conversation, but make sure you come to work, that you've had your breakfast, or you've taken your run, or you've done the things that you do to ensure that you are feeling, in good and confident to start out with. Really helps.
I can see somebody listening and thinking, okay, I'm going to super prepare. I'm going to be the best speaker ever in any situation. And I can see it going a little too far the other way, which is I'm going to script everything. I'm going to corporate speak the shit out of this. So where's the line?
Yeah, that's a great question, Russell. And I think, part of it is, and I use this example as well. It's really being tuned into your senses. So I say to people, you have everything you need already. It's just to tune in, to be aware. So one of the examples I gave in the book is of a woman who was having a really hard time. She was great. I mean, in so many ways, she was like an ideal communicator, but she was just so overly enthusiastic that she didn't really give other people much time to process her ideas, or to be able to respond to her ideas, or to have any real input. And when I asked her to think back over the times that she'd had these, less than satisfactory experiences, she was really able to enumerate quite specifically what was going on in the room, what the other people were doing, even the looks on their faces, and in some cases, even their verbatim responses, which is very hard for most people to remember. So she was alert. Her senses were on. She was aware. However, she wasn't taking the information and using it in the moment, because she was so focused on what she was trying to present and how she was trying to persuade, that she sort of neglected to just take in the information and then just be with it, to give herself the time to think, okay, oh, I see. Oh, Russell is looking away now. He's looking at his phone, which is not happening, people. But, as an example. So maybe I need to just stop for a moment and let him, come back into the room. So I would say to people, you already have your senses. Use those in your conversation. Observe the other person. Listen carefully. Be aware of your feeling when you walk into the room. You can often tell. People say, well, I don't know how to tune into my feelings. I say, have you ever walked into a room and just known that somebody just said something? You can feel the energy the moment you walk into a room. You know it. Someone super positive and cheerful walks into the room. You feel that energy. We all have that ability all the time. That intuition is working for us all the time. So I think in certain cases, you absolutely want to prepare. If you're going to give a presentation and you're going to get a lot of specific questions, you absolutely want to be prepared in that kind of case, different situation. On a day-to-day basis, the best preparation you can do is just to be aware, to stay alert to your own senses and to what information is being given to you from the outside world, and then be mindful of it and respond accordingly. And if you do that, I mean, I know, people say, well, what's, the one best piece of advice? And I'll say that to people, just notice. The best piece of advice I have is to start noticing. Start noticing what's going on for you, start noticing what's going on for other people, and then use that information.
Situational awareness and self-awareness are some of the biggest superpowers you can ever have in the workplace. And I'm glad you hammered that home. So from a speaking well perspective, how can that benefit the workplace? How can that help employee engagement? How can that help the employee experience, whether it's the person talking or the person being talked to?
Yeah. Have you ever been in that meeting, Russ, where, someone says, okay, I'd really like to hear what everyone has to think. What are your ideas? And nobody says anything. Right?
Yep.
Like we've all been there. Yeah. So So, I think when you just think about that situation and you think about for most organizations and businesses, and it doesn't really matter whether you're in the not-for-profit sector or the for-profit sector, innovation, ideas, these are our strengths, right? This is where we need to be in order to keep moving forward for whatever purposes that we have. And so the ability for people to feel safe and to feel involved and to feel engaged is going to be that juice that's going to give your organization or your business that different kind of energy and edge that you need to progress. And I'm always careful about like using really driven language. Like not every organization is out to serve ambitious purposes. Some of us are really trying to slow down in our workplaces and have a more mindful or slow learning approach. But you can have that too and have people engaged. So I think, when you think about the cost of not encouraging people to develop these skills or for not developing these skills for yourself, the cost to your career can be quite high, and the cost to your organization is going to be high because people are going to, and sometimes in the situation I gave to you, it can just be that it was a bad question. It was a question given without context and people don't know what ideas it is we're looking for today, and it could go far the other way. But I think it's really, when you just think about that, a room full of potential, untapped potential. And really every workplace has this in spades because, humans we're endlessly inventive, right? We're endlessly creative if we're given the chance to express it.
Now that scenario, though very familiar, there's also a certain layer to that I kind of want to touch on. Introversion versus extroversion. Because there'll be a lot of people in a situation like that won't speak up in a group because that's just not who they are comfortably. So to speak well, it feels like there's it works well for extroverts, but not so much for introverts. Or is it, it's still the same skill set. It's just a level of energy. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really great question. I'm sure it's one that a lot of people have. And the example that I gave the person who I call Lala in the book, or Nala rather, she was an extrovert and that was her problem. In that, because she was so extroverted, she just sort of felt like I could just go in there and I can just express and do this. And, one thing I notice about extroverts, and I'm an introvert, by the way, is that or self-identify as an introvert, is that they tend to not like silence much. And so often we need these pauses, right? People need to process, they need to catch up. Some of us are slower processors, and some of us, because introverts, we tend to like to process after the fact. We're like, okay, let me listen to that and let me get back to you. And I think that is a really a fair tactic for introverts to say, I've got all the information, let me think about this and I'll get back to you. And the other technique that I've used with a lot of introverts, and it's one I use myself and I use it when I'm leading meetings or when I'm leading workshops, but I also use it as an individual, is I write things down. So I make a deal with myself that when I'm asked the question by the facilitator, or the leader, I will make the deal with myself. I'm going to write down 3 responses to that question on my little, and I'm old school. I like a pen and paper, but most meetings you're allowed to have your phones. You can just not jot that in your notes. And then when the question comes around, what do you think? I have 3 things written down and I can pick one. And that's kind of how I've used as a little technique for dealing with the introversion extroversion scale. The extroverts are always going to jump in. But in a skillful meeting, people will be asked, or there'll be a go round, or there'll be an opportunity. Does anybody else want to say anything who hasn't spoken yet? And I have my 3 things written down and I'm ready to roll.
I like that you highlight that extroverts actually could get in their own way when it comes to speaking well. Well, introverts are predisposed to preparation just because.
It's true. It's true, and I guess that's my little technique is partly that. It's just like that. I'm sitting in the meeting and I'm just preparing for when my turn comes. But it is a tool that people can use. And again, you're talking about people who maybe aren't as comfortable in the verbal arena. And fair enough. I'm a very adapted introvert because I come from a family of extroverts. And if I was going to get a chance to say anything, I had to socially adapt in order to kind of to survive. But I do think there are tools that you can use. And I think one of the other possible silver linings or side benefits of the pandemic time that we've been through is just that people have made a new acquaintance with introversion and are seeing it in many ways as an asset. And there is a sort of an industrialized culture bent towards extroversion, the kind of get out there, the kind of hustle thing. And I've, as been kind of an advocate over the years of the sort of the anti-hustle message. We actually don't have to put ourselves under that kind of pressure day in and day out. So, but it's a really good question, because I think there are people who verbal arena is much more comfortable for them, and for others it's not. Again, just work on the skills. We don't have to be, I use a nice little model that, in the middle of the model is our safety zone. And then in the next circle of the model is the growth area, like the growing edge, things that are new to us where we stretch. And then outside of that is overwhelm. You don't have to put yourself in overwhelm. And you need to notice, practice awareness, and say, oh, I'm getting overwhelmed. I'm going to go back into my safety zone. And maybe that's writing things down. Or maybe that's speaking to your boss after the meeting and saying, you know what, I'm going to put my thoughts in an email for you. I have some ideas.
So I want to get better. I want to speak well at work. Where do I go for that information? How do I learn? Is it a muscle to strengthen, or is it research I need to take?
I think it's a combination of both. And partly, again, I would say it depends on what the personality of the individual. I think practice is practice, and where life is practice. It's not perfect. Life is not about perfection. Life is about practicing and trying to improve. And so I think taking opportunities to practice, to really lean into friends and colleagues that you trust, especially, when you have that opportunity to prepare side, use those people, run it by and people that you trust. Like, you have some friends that are going to love everything you do or hate everything you do. Well, those maybe aren't the people you want to go to. You want to go to the ones that are actually going to say, hey, this worked and this didn't quite work. But when you're in terms of the more spontaneous, getting more comfortable spontaneously, take a few risks. And that is muscle building, and it is practicing. I think that's really important. And I think, but the research is also useful. And reading like books like mine, there are courses that you can take for people who, I think a lot of people have had really effective results from things like Toastmasters and groups that they can join that help you get out and get up in front of people. And people know themselves best, and they know what works best for them in terms of a learning model. So I would say pick one that works for you, or pick two. Be aware of the overwhelm part of things, go where you feel safe, and then expand a little, grow a little, approach the growing edge with some curiosity, which we talked about earlier. How can I get better at this? What will it be like for me? Yeah.
Well, thanks, Vicki. Now you're going to help us get a little bit better with the final question of the podcast. I got to put in special effects there. So what, Vicki, is one simple action people can do right now to improve their relationships at work?
I think the best thing that they can do, and I'm going to use this big word, which is mindfulness, is to become more mindful. But I'm going to break that down into kind of two actual sort of tools. One is noticing. Just notice. What do I notice about this? And the second tool is, at the end of the day, write it down. Get a journal. And at the end of each day, write down what you noticed about your relationships at work, what you noticed about yourself, about what you noticed. So this is about increasing self-awareness and having an actual tool that you can use to help you track progress. I think if people did those two things, they would find almost organically, they'll find an improvement. I think they will.
Let's be hopeful. Yes. Thank you so much, Vicki McLeod. I really appreciate your time today and speaking so well with me.
Oh, thank you. It was just a pleasure. And I love what your podcast is about. And I hope people will continue to listen to it, because I just think it's so needed in our workplaces today. Yeah.
You're the best. Thanks, Vicki.
Thank you.